If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in second chances and the unbreakable bond between animals and humans. Let's spread the message of love, hope, and the power of finding home in the most unexpected places. The wind roared through the narrow streets of a quiet mountain town, sending swirls of snow dancing under the dim glow of streetlights. A small, frail puppy, his fur thick with ice and dirt, staggered forward, his tiny paws barely making an imprint in the heavy snowfall. His breath came in short, desperate puffs, his dark eyes scanning the empty road with fear and determination. He wasn't just lost. He was searching. With every aching step, the puppy pushed forward. The image of his mother burned into his mind. She was out there, alone and injured, waiting for help that might never come. But he couldn't stop, not yet. Just ahead, Deputy Claire Lawson stepped out of her patrol car, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders against the bitter cold. The shift had been long and uneventful, but as she turned to lock the door, a faint sound carried through the storm. A whimper, soft but insistent. Her eyes landed on the struggling pup just as he stumbled forward, collapsing in the snow at her feet. Claire's heart clenched. She knelt beside him, reaching out with slow, careful movements. "Hey there, little guy," she murmured, her voice gentle but filled with concern. The puppy flinched, but didn't retreat. Instead, with trembling legs, he nudged her hand with his nose before turning away. He took a few weak steps, then looked back at her, pleading. Claire's gut tightened. This wasn't just a lost pup. He was trying to lead her somewhere. She didn't hesitate. The night deepened as Claire followed the determined little dog through the frozen streets. His steps were uneven, his small body barely holding up against the cold, but he pressed on, glancing back every few moments to make sure she was still behind him. Her boots crunched in the fresh snow as she moved faster, her police instincts sharpening. Something was waiting at the end of this path, something urgent. Minutes passed, each one making Claire more anxious. The town's buildings grew sparse as they neared the outskirts, where the land sloped into thick woods. The puppy's pace slowed as they reached the entrance of a narrow alley between two abandoned buildings. He stopped abruptly, his frail body quivering. Then, with all the strength he had left, he let out a single desperate bark before collapsing onto the icy ground. Claire's breath caught as she turned her flashlight toward the alley's shadowed depths. There, barely visible against the snow, lay a larger dog motionless. Claire's heart pounded as she rushed forward. The German Shepherd's body was still, her fur matted with blood, but as Claire knelt beside her, she saw the faint rise and fall of her chest. She was alive. The pup let out a soft whimper, lifting his head to watch Claire. His exhausted eyes held one final plea. Save her. Claire's hands moved quickly, brushing snow from the dog's fur as she checked for injuries. The mother dog flinched under her touch but didn't resist. "You did good, little guy," Claire whispered, glancing back at the puppy who had led her here. With careful movements, she pulled off her jacket and draped it over the injured dog to keep her warm. Then, lifting her radio, she called for backup. "I need immediate assistance on the east side of town. Injured dog, possible hypothermia. Send animal control with a heat unit." Static crackled before a voice responded. "Copy that, Deputy Lawson. We're on our way." Claire exhaled in relief, then turned back to the puppy. He had curled up beside his mother, tucking himself against her for warmth. She reached out and ran a hand gently over his icy fur. "You're a hero, you know that?" she murmured. For the first time since she'd found him, the puppy's tail gave a small, hopeful wag. And in the cold, quiet night, help was finally coming. The wind howled through the clearing, a relentless force that bit at Claire's exposed skin as she knelt beside the injured German Shepherd. The storm had worsened, and the snow was coming down heavier now, obscuring the world around them. But she didn't need to see anything else. Everything that mattered was right in front of her. Ghost, the small puppy who had led her here, whimpered softly, pressing himself against her side. His wide, pleading eyes darted between Claire and his mother, urging her to do something, anything, to save the injured dog. Claire took a deep breath, steadying herself. She could feel the cold seeping into her bones, but she ignored it. Her focus was on the German Shepherd lying in the snow. The blood trailing from her paw painted a heartbreaking picture of just how far she had come. Gently, Claire reached out to touch the dog's fur. "Hey there, girl," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the wind. "You're gonna be okay." The shepherd lifted her head weakly, her deep brown eyes locking onto Claire's. There was pain in them, exhaustion, but also trust. She let out a faint whimper but didn't flinch under Claire's touch. Ghost let out a tiny bark, as if urging Claire to hurry. She nodded, her mind racing. They needed to get out of here fast. But the storm made everything more complicated. Visibility was near zero, and the roads would be covered in ice. Carrying an injured dog through this weather wouldn't be easy, but she had no choice. Her radio crackled in her pocket. Static filled the air for a moment before a familiar voice broke through. "Lawson, come in. What's your status?" It was Deputy Reed from dispatch. Claire grabbed the radio, pressing it to her lips. "Reed, I need immediate assistance. Injured dog, severe blood loss. I'm near the abandoned lot on Maple and 5th. There was a pause. Then, copy that. Sending backup now. Hold tight." Relief flickered through her, but she knew help wasn't coming fast enough. She had to get the shepherd out of here before it was too late. Claire turned back to the dog, brushing more snow from her fur. "I need to move you, okay? I know it's gonna hurt, but I promise, I won't let anything happen to you." The shepherd let out a low whine, but she didn't resist as Claire carefully slid her arms beneath her. The dog was heavier than she expected, but Claire gritted her teeth and lifted. Ghost immediately pressed close, his small body trembling but determined to stay by his mother's side. Step by step, Claire trudged through the deep snow, her arms straining against the weight. The wind whipped around them, making it feel as though the world was closing in. Every breath burned in her lungs, but she kept going. Ghost trotted beside her, his little paws disappearing into the snow with each step, but he never hesitated. He had fought too hard to give up now. The journey back to her patrol car felt endless. The storm blurred everything, the cold numbed her fingers, and the weight of the dog in her arms was relentless. But finally her car came into view, its headlights barely visible through the swirling snow. Claire staggered the last few steps, wrenching the door open and carefully setting the shepherd inside, wrapping her in the emergency blanket she kept in the trunk. Ghost jumped in right after her, immediately curling up beside his mother. Claire fumbled with her radio again. "Reed, I have her. Heading back to the station now. Get the vet on standby." "Understood. Be careful out there, Lawson." Claire didn't need to be told twice. She climbed into the driver's seat, her hands shaking slightly as she turned the key. The engine roared to life, and she wasted no time pulling onto the icy road. The drive back was tense. The snow made visibility near impossible, and every turn of the wheel felt like a battle against nature itself. But every time she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Ghost curled protectively around his mother, she knew she was doing the right thing. When she finally pulled into the station, the doors burst open. A vet technician, already waiting with supplies, rushed forward. Claire threw open the back door. "She's weak, but she made it." The technician nodded, assessing the shepherd quickly before lifting her onto a stretcher. "She's a fighter," they murmured. "We'll do everything we can." Ghost whined, trying to follow, but Claire gently held him back. "Let them help her," she whispered. "She needs them now." For the first time, Ghost hesitated. But then he did something that broke Claire's heart. He pressed his tiny head against her leg, seeking comfort. Claire knelt, wrapping her arms around him. "You did it," she said softly. "You saved her." Ghost licked her chin once, then turned his gaze toward the doors where his mother had disappeared. Claire knew the fight wasn't over yet. But as she held the little puppy close, she also knew something else. No matter what happened next, Ghost would never be alone again. The storm continued to rage as Deputy Claire Lawson tightened her grip on the steering wheel, navigating the treacherous roads with careful precision. The swirling snow created an eerie haze, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The patrol car's tires struggled for traction against the icy pavement, but she kept moving forward because stopping wasn't an option. In the back seat, Roxy lay curled up, her breathing still shallow but steady. "Ghost." The tiny German Shepherd puppy remained pressed against his mother's side, his small body offering warmth and comfort. His wide eyes flickered between Claire and Roxy, his ears twitching at every bump in the road. Claire stole a glance at them through the rearview mirror. The sight of Ghost's unwavering devotion to his mother sent a sharp pang through her chest. He had braved the storm, the cold, and exhaustion to lead her to Roxy. Now, it was Claire's turn to make sure they survived. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. "Hang in there, Roxy," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're almost there." The snow thickened, and the road ahead disappeared under a blanket of white. Claire's heart pounded as she flicked on the sirens, not for speed, but to make sure any vehicle in the distance would see her. Her radio crackled again, barely cutting through the static. Lawson status storm delay, back up. The words were fragmented, but she got the message. No help was coming anytime soon. Claire swallowed hard. She was on her own. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders, but she refused to let fear take over. She'd handled tough situations before. She had faced danger. But this was different. This was about more than duty. It was about survival. The wind howled against the car, rattling the windows. Ghost let out a soft whimper, his tiny nose nudging Roxy's ear as if pleading for her to wake up. Claire's grip on the wheel tightened. "We're gonna make it," she reassured them, though part of her wasn't sure if she was trying to convince them or herself. Minutes stretched into eternity as she pressed forward, navigating the near-invisible road. Every turn of the wheel was a battle against nature itself. But then finally a distant glow broke through the storm. The veterinary clinic. Claire exhaled sharply, relief washing over her. "We made it," she whispered. She pulled up to the entrance, barely putting the car in park before throwing open the door. Cold air rushed in as she hurried to the back seat. Ghost immediately perked up, his tail giving the faintest wag as Claire gently lifted Roxy. The dog let out a soft whimper but didn't resist. Claire could feel the weakness in her body, the way her muscles had given up, but there was still life in her, still a chance. The clinic doors burst open as the vet team rushed toward her, their faces lined with concern. "What happened?" one of them asked as they helped transfer Roxy onto a stretcher. "She was injured in the storm," Claire explained quickly. "Her pup led me to her. She's lost a lot of blood." The vet nodded, his hands already assessing her condition. "We'll do everything we can." Ghost tried to follow as they wheeled Roxy inside, but Claire scooped him up, cradling him against her chest. "Easy, buddy," she murmured. "She's in good hands now." The little pup trembled in her arms, his eyes never leaving his mother. Claire stroked his fur gently, whispering reassurances he couldn't fully understand but needed to hear. Minutes turned into hours. Claire paced the waiting room, Ghost curled up beside her on the bench. He hadn't slept, hadn't even moved. Every so often, his ears would perk at the sound of footsteps, but none of them brought Roxy back. Then, finally, the vet emerged. Claire stood instantly, Ghost lifting his head in anticipation. "How is she?" she asked, her voice laced with exhaustion and hope. "She's stable," the vet replied with a small smile. "It was close, but she's strong. With time and care, she's going to recover." Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Relief flooded her system, and she felt Ghost shift beside her, as if he understood. His tiny tail gave a hopeful wag. "She's awake," the vet added. "And she's been looking for her pup." Claire didn't wait for permission. She gently picked up Ghost and followed the vet through the hallways until they reached the recovery area. The moment they stepped inside, Ghost's ears perked up. His little body tensed, and then he wriggled out of Claire's arms, bolting straight to the padded bed where Roxy lay. The sight was enough to bring tears to Claire's eyes. Ghost nuzzled into his mother's side, his tiny whines filling the quiet room. Roxy, though weak, lifted her head just enough to lick his face before resting her chin against it. The bond between them, unbreakable, unwavering, was stronger than words. Claire watched them for a long moment, then crouched beside them, her fingers brushing gently over Roxy's fur. "You did good, girl," she whispered. "You raised a fighter." Roxy let out a contented sigh, her eyes closing as she drifted into a well-earned rest. Ghost remained at her side, his little body pressed close, finally at peace. Claire exhaled deeply, leaning back against the wall. She had been meant to find them. She knew that now. This wasn't just another case, another rescue. This was something bigger. A second chance. A new beginning. And as she sat there, the storm still raging outside, she realized that maybe, just maybe, they had saved each other. Deputy Claire Lawson sat in the dimly lit waiting room, her body aching from exhaustion, yet her mind refused to rest. The storm still raged outside, its howling winds rattling the windows as if trying to claw their way inside. She had done everything she could. She had gotten Roxy and Ghost to safety, and now it was in the hands of the veterinarians. But that didn't stop the tight knot of worry from settling in her chest. Ghost sat curled up beside her, his small body still trembling from the cold and fear. He pressed himself against her leg, his warm brown eyes flickering between the door where the vet had taken Roxy and Claire's face. He was waiting for answers, just like she was. Claire ran a hand over his tiny head, smoothing down the damp fur between his ears. "She's strong, buddy," she whispered. "She's going to pull through. You got her here just in time." Ghost let out a soft whimper and nuzzled his head against her palm. Claire felt a lump rise in her throat. How had this tiny creature endured so much? He had braved the freezing cold, the storm, and his own exhaustion, all to find someone who could help his mother. His courage was something she had rarely seen even in the toughest officers she had worked with. The door to the back room swung open, and Claire shot to her feet. The veterinarian, a woman in her 50s with sharp yet kind eyes, approached with a clipboard in hand. "Deputy Lawson," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Roxy is stable." Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She nodded quickly, her fingers tightening around Ghost's small body. "The injury to her paw was severe, but we've cleaned and treated the wound. She's dehydrated and malnourished, but with the right care, she's going to recover. It'll take time, but she's a fighter." Claire exhaled in relief, her shoulders finally dropping. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. The vet gave her a small smile. "You should be thanking him," she said, nodding toward Ghost. "If he hadn't found you when he did, I don't know if she would have lasted much longer." Claire looked down at the puppy, who wagged his tail softly but kept his eyes fixed on the door. "He never gave up," she murmured. "He knew what he had to do." The vet studied them for a moment before asking, "Do you have any idea where they came from? Anyone looking for them?" Claire shook her head. "I don't think so. I didn't see any tags or a microchip when I checked earlier. It's like they just appeared out of nowhere." The vet nodded thoughtfully. "We'll scan her again, just to be sure, but if no one comes forward, they'll need a place to go." The words hit Claire like a slow-moving realization. She had found them in the middle of a storm, rescued them when no one else had. Could she really just walk away now? Ghost looked up at her, his head tilting slightly as if he could sense her thoughts. His small tail thumped once against the floor. "Can I see her?" Claire asked. "Of course," the vet said. "She's resting now, but she's been responding well to treatment. I think she'll be happy to see you both." Claire followed the vet down the hallway, Ghost trotting beside her, his steps light but determined. When they entered the recovery room, Claire's heart clenched. Roxy lay on a soft bed, her injured paw wrapped in fresh bandages. Though her body was still weak, her eyes opened slowly as they approached. The moment she saw Ghost, her tail gave a faint wag. Ghost rushed forward, pressing his tiny body against hers, nuzzling into her fur. Roxy let out a deep sigh, a sound of relief and recognition. Claire knelt beside them, placing a gentle hand on Roxy's side. "You're safe now," she murmured. "Both of you." The warmth in the room contrasted sharply with the storm outside. For the first time since finding them, Claire let herself believe that everything was going to be okay. The vet watched quietly before speaking. "They're going to need someone to take care of them. At least for now." Claire looked at Roxy, then at Ghost. She had always told herself she was too busy for a pet, too wrapped up in the demands of the job. But as she sat there, watching the way Ghost refused to leave his mother's side, she knew the decision had already been made. "I'll take them," Claire said, her voice steady. Whatever they need, I'll make sure they have it. The vet smiled. I had a feeling you'd say that. Ghost lifted his head, his eyes shining with trust. Roxy, the weak, let out a contented sigh. Claire reached down and scratched behind Ghost's ears. Looks like you've got a new home, little guy. Ghost wagged his tail a little harder. Outside, the storm finally began to ease, the howling wind settling into a quiet hush. The snow still fell, but now it was soft, gentle, a sign that the worst had passed. And as Claire sat there with the two dogs, she realized that maybe, just maybe, the storm had led them to exactly where they were meant to be. The storm outside had lessened, but its effects lingered, both in the icy roads and in the hearts of those who had braved it. Deputy Claire Lawson sat quietly in the animal hospital, her fingers gently stroking Ghost's small head as he dozed against her lap. The little German Shepherd puppy had been through so much, yet he remained steadfast, his bond with his mother unbreakable. Roxy was healing, but it would be a long road ahead. Dr. Harrison had been clear her fractured paw was severe, and though they had managed the infection, the recovery process would take weeks, maybe months. But Roxy was a fighter, and Ghost never left her side. Neither did Claire. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady hum of machines monitoring Roxy's vitals. Claire watched as Ghost stirred, letting out a small sigh before blinking up at her. His eyes, filled with trust, held none of the fear he had when she first found him in the snow. He was safe now. They both were. A soft knock at the door made Claire look up. Dr. Harrison entered, clipboard in hand, her expression warm but serious. Roxy's making good progress, she said. Her infection is under control, and she's responding well to treatment. But Claire, she hesitated. We need to talk about what happens next. Claire took a deep breath. She knew this was coming. The hospital had done all they could, but Roxy and Ghost couldn't stay here forever. You're right, Claire said, her voice steady. They need a real home. Dr. Harrison smiled knowingly. And do you have one in mind? Claire hesitated, glancing at Ghost, who was now chewing softly on the hem of her jacket. He had chosen her from the very beginning, guiding her through the storm to his mother, trusting her to save them. Could she really let them go now? I do, she admitted softly. Mine. Dr. Harrison's smile grew. I had a feeling you'd say that. The decision settled over Claire like a warm blanket. It was strange before that fateful night she had never considered adopting a pet. Her job kept her busy, and her home had always been just a place to sleep between shifts. But now? Now, it was clear. Roxy and Ghost belonged with her. Roxy will need continued care, Dr. Harrison continued. Limited movement, therapy for her leg. Ghost is in good shape, but he's still young. He'll need training, structure. I can handle it, Claire said firmly. Dr. Harrison nodded. I have no doubt about that. The next few days were a blur of preparations. Claire made sure her home was ready, purchasing supplies, setting up a comfortable space for Roxy's recovery, and puppy-proofing her small apartment for Ghost's boundless energy. But through it all, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: excitement. Finally, the day came. Roxy was strong enough to leave the hospital, and as Claire secured her in the back seat of her patrol car, Ghost eagerly jumped in beside her, his tail wagging. Guess you're excited to go home, huh? Claire mused, scratching behind his ears. The drive home was quiet, peaceful even. The storm was gone, and the roads were clear. The city lights flickered in the distance as Claire pulled up to her house. She opened the door, leading Roxy carefully inside while Ghost bounded ahead, exploring his new home. Claire watched as Roxy slowly settled onto the soft bed she had prepared, her tired body sinking into the warmth. Ghost curled up beside her, pressing his small frame against his mother's side. They had made it, together. Sitting down beside them, Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She had spent years in law enforcement, helping others, serving the community. But this was different. This was personal. You're safe now, she murmured, running her hand gently over Roxy's fur. Both of you. Ghost looked up at her, his tail thumping lightly against the floor. And in that moment, Claire realized something profound: she hadn't just saved them. They had saved her too. The weeks that followed were filled with adjustments, challenges, and countless moments of joy. Roxy's recovery was slow but steady, her strength returning a little more each day. Ghost thrived, his playful spirit bringing laughter into Claire's home in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Her colleagues teased her, calling her the canine whisperer, but they could see the change in her. The once distant deputy now had a new sense of purpose, a reason to rush home after a long shift. One evening, as Claire sat on her porch, watching Ghost chase his tail in the fading sunset, while Roxy rested peacefully beside her, she realized how much her life had changed. And she wouldn't have it any other way. The storm had brought them together, but love had made them a family. The morning light filtered through the frosted hospital windows, casting a soft glow over the recovery room. Deputy Claire Lawson sat beside Roxy's bed, her fingers gently stroking the German Shepherd's fur. It had been a long night, but Roxy's breathing had steadied, her muscles no longer tense with fear. Claire exhaled, feeling a weight lift from her chest. They were getting there slowly, but they were getting there. Ghost sat curled up against his mother, his small body rising and falling in sync with her breaths. Despite the ordeal he had been through, he never left her side. Claire couldn't help but admire his unwavering loyalty. He was just a pup, but he had the heart of a protector. Dr. Harrison entered the room, flipping through her notes. "She's making progress," she said with a reassuring smile. "Her vitals are strong, and physically, she's healing well. The anxiety episodes, those will take time." Claire nodded, glancing at Roxy. "What can I do to help her?" Dr. Harrison considered for a moment before responding. "She needs stability, routine. Somewhere she can feel safe." She looked at Claire, her eyes knowing. "She needs a home." Claire swallowed hard. She had been avoiding this conversation, not because she didn't care if anything, she cared too much. But was she really the right person to take them in? Her job as a deputy meant long hours, unpredictable days. Could she give them the life they deserved? Ghost lifted his head, his deep brown eyes locking onto Claire's as if he knew exactly what she was thinking. He let out a soft whimper, nudging her hand. Claire sighed, scratching behind his ears. "You're not making this easy, little guy." Dr. Harrison chuckled. "You know, sometimes they choose us before we even realize we've chosen them." Claire sat with that thought as she watched Roxy and Ghost together. The idea of letting them go didn't sit right. She had been there when they needed her most when no one else was. And now, the thought of them going to some unknown family, some unfamiliar place, felt wrong. The decision had already been made. She just had to say it out loud. She looked up at Dr. Harrison. What would it take to officially adopt them? A slow smile spread across the vet's face. "I'll get the paperwork started." Later that afternoon, Claire walked through the quiet halls of the hospital, her boots echoing against the tile floor. Ghost trotted beside her, tail wagging slightly, his tiny paws clicking with each step. She was taking him outside for a quick walk while Roxy rested. Stepping out into the crisp winter air, Claire felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. It was the first time in days that she wasn't consumed by worry. Ghost stayed close as they walked along the shoveled path behind the hospital. He sniffed the air, his ears twitching at every new sound. "You're a curious little thing, aren't you?" Claire mused, watching as he pounced on a small patch of untouched snow. Ghost let out an excited yip, shaking off the cold before bounding back toward her. She knelt down, ruffling his fur. "You're gonna have a good life, buddy," she promised. "Both of you." As they turned back toward the hospital, Claire felt lighter. She had spent so much time focused on saving them, but maybe, just maybe, they had saved her too. 2 weeks later, Claire pulled into her driveway, her heart pounding with anticipation. The paperwork was finalized. The vet had cleared Roxy for release, and today was the day she was bringing them home. She opened the back door of her truck, where Roxy lay on a thick blanket, Ghost curled up beside her. "All right, guys," she said, unbuckling the carrier strap. "Welcome home." Ghost leapt out first, his tiny legs carrying him across the driveway as he explored. Roxy was slower, still regaining her strength, but there was something in her eyes, something Claire hadn't seen before. Peace. Claire led them inside, watching as they took in their new surroundings. Ghost sniffed everything, his tail wagging furiously, while Roxy settled onto the soft dog bed Claire had set up by the fireplace. She let out a deep, contented sigh, stretching her legs before resting her head on her paws. Claire stood in the doorway, arms crossed, taking it all in. For the first time in a long time, everything felt right. She sat down beside Roxy, scratching gently behind her ears. "You're safe now," she murmured. "No more storms. No more running. Just home." Ghost curled up beside her, pressing his small body against her leg. Claire smiled, letting the warmth of the fire and the warmth of this new beginning fill the room. But sometimes, the best things in life come when you least expect them. Deputy Claire Lawson sat on her apartment floor, watching as Ghost clumsily pounced on a rubber ball, his tiny tail wagging furiously. Across the room, Roxy lay stretched out on her new bed by the window, her amber eyes filled with quiet contentment. The once injured German Shepherd was healing physically and emotionally, and Claire could see the difference in her every single day. It had been a long journey since that fateful night in the storm, but they had made it. Claire leaned back against the couch, taking a deep breath as she reflected on how much had changed in such a short amount of time. She hadn't planned for any of this. In fact, before that night, she never thought of herself as someone who had time for pets. But now, she couldn't imagine life without them. Ghost bounded over to her, his oversized paws skidding slightly on the wooden floor before he flopped into her lap. He looked up at her with those big brown eyes, full of trust and unspoken love. She chuckled, rubbing his ears. "You really have no idea how close we all came to losing each other, do you?" she murmured. Ghost yawned and nudged her hand insistently, demanding more attention. Claire obliged, running her fingers through his soft fur. She'd always believed in fate in a distant, logical sense, but now she was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, they had all been meant to find each other. Roxy lifted her head, watching the interaction between Claire and Ghost with quiet understanding. She still had a long road to recovery, but she was no longer the frightened, injured dog Claire had found lying in the snow. There was a strength in her eyes now, a resilience that mirrored Claire's own. The sound of a knock on the door pulled Claire from her thoughts. She stood up, Ghost at her heels, and opened it to find her partner from the precinct, Officer Daniels, standing there with a paper bag in his hands. "Figured you could use some real food," Daniels said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He glanced around the apartment, his eyes landing on Roxy. "She looks good, stronger." Claire nodded, following his gaze. "She's getting there. It's been slow, but she's trusting me more every day." Daniel set the bag down on the kitchen counter and crossed his arms. "And you? You trusting yourself more?" Claire raised an eyebrow. "What's that supposed to mean?" Daniel smirked. "I mean, I haven't seen you this settled in a long time. Ever since." "Don't," Claire cut in, shaking her head. She didn't need to talk about the past. Not right now. Daniel sighed but let it go. Instead, he crouched down and scratched behind Ghost's ears. "He's grown a bit, huh? Looks like he's got some fight in him." Claire smiled. "He does. He saved his mom out there. Led me right to her." Daniels looked up, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he stood. "Sounds like he takes after his new owner." Claire scoffed, but didn't argue. Instead, she grabbed a plate and started unpacking the food he had brought. She hadn't realized how much she needed a normal moment like this, a simple dinner with a friend, in a home that finally felt like hers. As they ate, Roxy stretched and slowly made her way over, settling beside Claire's chair. Ghost, always eager for attention, rested his head on her knee. The weight of him, warm and steady, was grounding. Daniels took a sip of his drink, watching them with amusement. "So, you keeping them both?" he asked. Claire glanced down at Roxy and Ghost. The answer had been clear from the moment she had carried Roxy into that animal hospital. "Yeah," she said softly. "I am." Daniels grinned. "Good, they suit you." Claire reached down, running her fingers through Ghost's fur as she let the warmth of the moment settle over her. She had spent years dedicated to protecting others, always on the move, never letting herself get too attached to anything outside the job. But this was different. This was home. She looked over at Roxy, then at Ghost. "We're family now," she whispered. And for the first time in a long time, Claire Lawson felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the quiet park. Deputy Claire Lawson sat on a bench, watching Ghost dart across the grass, his playful barks echoing in the crisp evening air. Roxy lay beside her, eyes half closed, her body finally at ease after the long journey they had all taken together. Claire reached down, running her fingers gently through Roxy's fur. It was hard to believe that not long ago, they had been fighting against a brutal storm, desperate to survive. Now, they were here, in the warmth of the fading daylight, safe and whole. Ghost came bounding back, his tiny frame vibrating with excitement. He leaped into Claire's lap, nuzzling into her chest. She chuckled, scratching behind his ears. "You've come a long way, little guy," she murmured. Roxy lifted her head, gazing at them both with quiet affection. Claire met her eyes, and in that moment, no words were needed. They had fought, they had struggled, and now they had found peace. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Claire took a deep breath, feeling lighter than she had in years. This wasn't just a rescue story anymore. This was family. They had made it through the storm together, and no matter what lay ahead, they would face it side by side. The story of Deputy Claire Lawson, Roxy, and Ghost is more than just a tale of survival. It's a powerful reflection of resilience, trust, and the deep bonds that form in times of adversity. In real life, we often face storms of our own, whether they are emotional struggles, personal losses, or unexpected challenges. Just like Ghost braving the cold to find help for his mother, we sometimes need to seek support and trust that the right people will come into our lives when we need them the most. Claire's decision to follow Ghost despite not knowing where he was leading her reminds us of the importance of listening to our instincts and acting with compassion. In our daily lives, we encounter situations where we are called to step up, to help someone in need, or to make a decision that requires courage. The key takeaway from this story is that kindness and bravery go hand in hand sometimes. Taking that extra step for someone else can change their life, and in turn, change ours. Furthermore, Roxy's journey from a place of vulnerability to healing serves as a reminder that healing takes time, patience, and the support of those who care for us. Whether we are recovering from a personal setback or helping someone through a difficult time, having a strong support system can make all the difference. Advice for life: trust your instincts just like Claire followed Ghost. Trust when something feels important or urgent. Offer help when you can. You never know when your kindness might save or change a life. Build strong relationships. Love and loyalty, as seen between Roxy, Ghost, and Claire, are the foundation of true strength. Embrace second chances. Life's challenges can lead to beautiful new beginnings if we remain open to them. In the end, love, trust, and resilience can guide us through any storm. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in second chances and the unbreakable bond between animals and humans. Let's spread the message of love, hope, and the power of finding home in the most unexpected places.